September 1944. A train screeches to a halt at Fort Devens, Massachusetts. Inside, 47 German women prisoners of war, their faces pale, their hearts racing. To them, America was supposed to be a nightmare. Bombed-out cities, vengeful soldiers, a land of hunger and punishment. That's what the Nazi broadcasts had told them, over and over. But when the doors opened, what they saw wasn't chaos. It was order, quiet, green hills, children playing. And then came something that shattered everything they thought they knew. American soldiers walking toward them, not with guns, but with cups of water. That single act of kindness cracked years of fear and propaganda. It was the beginning of one of the most unexpected human stories of World War II. A story of compassion behind barbed wire, of friendship between supposed enemies, and of one woman who discovered that sometimes captivity can feel freer than home. Before we dive into this astonishing chapter of history, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our deep dives into the hidden human stories of war, courage, and hope. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? It's always incredible to see how far these forgotten stories travel across the world. The train screeched to a halt, its metallic cry slicing through the crisp Massachusetts air. Steam hissed along the tracks as 47 German women pressed their faces to the barred windows, hearts pounding with dread. For weeks they had whispered about this moment, their arrival in the enemy's land. They imagined ruins, scorched cities, cruel soldiers waiting with rifles and hate. Instead, the station was quiet, almost unnervingly calm. Greta Meller watched the scene unfold, her breath fogging the glass. Instead of bombed-out wastelands, she saw neat rows of houses, shop fronts with painted signs, and children chasing a ball beneath fluttering autumn leaves. The air smelled of rain and distant pine. Somewhere nearby, a church bell rang noon. It was all so ordinary, so heartbreakingly peaceful, that Greta's fear twisted into confusion. Was this really America, the land of monsters? When the guards finally opened the carriage doors, the women stiffened. Their training screamed danger, yet what greeted them wasn't shouting or weapons, but quiet organization. American soldiers spoke calmly, directing them with clipped courtesy. Their boots crunched on gravel as they stepped down. Greta's knees trembled, her body expecting blows that never came. Around her, other women clutched their belongings, blinking in disbelief at the calm unfolding around them. Then something extraordinary happened. A young American soldier approached the group carrying a bucket and several tin cups. His voice, gentle but firm, broke through the nervous silence. "Water. You must be thirsty." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Was this a trick? Ingrid Weber, standing beside Greta, hissed under her breath, "Don't touch it! They fatten us before the torture!" Her words echoed old fears that refused to die. But Greta's throat burned with thirst. The soldier's face showed no mockery, no cruelty, only simple kindness. Hesitantly, she reached out, her fingers brushing cold metal as she accepted the cup. The water was clean, shockingly clean. As it touched her tongue, something inside her cracked. She had prepared for hate, not for humanity. Around her, a few women began accepting cups too, their suspicion fighting an undeniable need for relief. The soldier nodded slightly, a quiet acknowledgement of shared exhaustion, and moved on. Greta watched him go, bewildered. This small act, this offering of water, felt like a rebellion against everything she'd been taught. They were led toward the camp gates in silence. The guards walked beside them, not behind, with rifles raised. No shouting, no pushing, just a firm, disciplined rhythm that felt more like escort than capture. Inside Fort Devens, neat barracks lined the gravel pathways. White fences, trimmed hedges, even flowers. Roses, somehow still blooming in late September. Greta stared as if she'd fallen into a dream stitched from contradictions. A woman in uniform awaited them at the reception area. Captain Margaret Walsh, an American nurse with steady eyes and a voice soft but authoritative, addressed the group in careful German. "You will receive meals, medical care, safety." The words seemed unreal. Safety? Greta glanced at the others. Disbelief rippled through them like wind through tall grass. Could kindness be regulation? Could mercy exist inside a prison camp? As they were assigned bunks, Greta's mind buzzed. She expected shouts, humiliation, endless suspicion, but instead she found clean sheets, hot food, even soap. Her body relaxed, but her thoughts refused to follow. That night she lay awake on her narrow cot, the distant hum of American life drifting through the window, cars, laughter, a radio playing softly. In Germany, those sounds had long been replaced by sirens and fear. Ingrid whispered from the next bed, her tone sharp with mistrust. "Don't be fooled, Greta. It's a trick. They smile while planning how to break us." Greta didn't answer. She didn't know what to believe anymore. She clutched the thin blanket and stared into the dark, wondering what truth might lie beyond propaganda and pride. Maybe, she thought, the real danger wasn't cruelty, but discovering that the enemy could be kind. Sleep came slowly that first night. Greta lay awake, her mind looping through memories of Germany, posters plastered on walls, radio voices thick with fury, promises that America was a wasteland of savages and ruin. She remembered her Red Cross instructor, a loyal party woman, warning them that capture meant death or worse. "Americans don't respect women," she'd said. "They'll make you beg for mercy." Everyone had believed her completely. Propaganda had been their daily bread. Newsreels showed caricatures of fat, greedy Americans hoarding food, dancing while Europe burned. Their teachers whispered that Allied soldiers would brand German prisoners like cattle. Every image fed their fear. Now here she was, clean, fed, unhurt, listening to a radio playing swing music somewhere beyond the barracks. It was so absurd that she wanted to laugh, but guilt choked the sound in her throat. Because back home, laughter was rationed. Her mother's letters had spoken of bombed neighborhoods, of bread lines stretching for blocks, of sirens that howled through every night. And here, in enemy land, there was peace. When one guard smiled politely, Greta looked away too quickly, startled by the unfamiliar kindness. Was this what real strength looked like? Not domination but control, not cruelty but quiet confidence? Across the table, Ingrid whispered again, clinging to the comfort of suspicion. "Don't forget who they are. This is performance. They want us weak." Her voice trembled with conviction, yet also fear that she might be wrong. Greta said nothing. Part of her still believed Ingrid, but part of her was beginning to doubt the voices that had shaped her life since childhood. Doubt felt dangerous, but also strangely alive. A breeze carried laughter from the guard station. Not mocking, just ordinary. The sound filled the air like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. Greta caught herself smiling before shame forced her lips still again. Later, inside the mess hall, a newspaper lay folded on a table. The Boston Globe. A headline about rationing caught her eye. Even America had shortages, but it still looked like another world entirely. She traced the printed words, realizing she could barely read English beyond a few simple terms. The language of the enemy suddenly fascinated her, not as a weapon, but as a key to understanding. That night, Greta couldn't stop thinking about the contradictions piling in her mind. Could a country capable of kindness still drop bombs? Could people this gentle still see her as the enemy? As the camp lights dimmed, She stared at the ceiling and wondered how many lies she had swallowed, how many fears she had mistaken for truth. For the first time, she didn't feel certain of anything. And somehow that uncertainty, the crumbling of absolute belief, felt like the first step toward freedom. 3 days into captivity, Greta's name appeared on the duty roster. She had been assigned to assist in the camp hospital. Her previous work with the German Red Cross finally noted, her skills now serving a new flag. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and possibility. White sheets, polished instruments, and shelves lined with medicine that seemed impossibly plentiful compared to Germany's crumbling reserves. Greta hesitated at the doorway, her heart hammering in defiance of reason. Captain Margaret Walsh greeted her with a nod, clipboard in hand. The American nurse's posture was military, but her tone held something warmer, respect, perhaps, or the kind of compassion that transcended uniforms. "You'll help sterilize tools, change dressings, and prepare bandages," she said in clear, careful German. Greta blinked. Few Americans tried to speak their language. The attempt itself felt like an olive branch offered quietly across barbed wire. Hours passed quickly as Greta worked under Captain Walsh's supervision. The rhythm of care, the steady pulse of purpose, was familiar. Healing was neutral ground, untouched by politics, where pain spoke a language everyone understood. Late that morning, a child's cry pierced the ward. Greta turned to see a feverish toddler in his mother's arms, one of the younger prisoners, terrified by the unfamiliar faces surrounding him. Captain Walsh approached gently, her movements precise, her eyes full of concern, but the child shrieked louder, thrashing away from her. "He won't let me near him," Walsh murmured, frustration and worry blending in her voice. The melody wove through the air, fragile yet strong. The child's sobs weakened, then softened, his tiny body relaxing against his mother. Greta knelt beside him, cooling his forehead with a damp cloth. When Captain Walsh leaned close again, the boy didn't flinch. Together they worked in silence. One German, one American, united by the universal duty to comfort a frightened child. In that quiet cooperation, something shifted. Later, as they cleaned instruments, Captain Walsh spoke softly. "You're good with children," she said, her accent precise but kind. Greta hesitated before replying. "I helped raise my sister. War makes everyone afraid." It wasn't just a sentence. It was confession disguised as small talk. Captain Walsh nodded, understanding more than words could carry. "Fear," she said, "is what we all treat here, one way or another." In the following days, Greta's presence became a quiet constant in the hospital. She mended wounds, boiled gauze, listened to moans that sounded the same in every language. For the first time, she felt useful again. But whispers followed her in the barracks. Ingrid muttered that she was getting too close to the enemy, that Captain Walsh's kindness was only another layer of deception. Greta pretended not to hear, though the words stung. At night, she thought of the child's calm face, of Walsh's steady hands, of the way humanity could slip through the cracks of even the hardest walls. Was kindness really a tactic, or was it truth? Captain Walsh seemed to sense her turmoil. One afternoon, while logging medical supplies, she paused and said quietly, "War ends, Miss Muller, but how we treat each other, that's what remains afterward." The sentence settled deep inside Greta's chest, heavy with meaning. She realized she had begun to look forward to her shifts, not for escape, but for understanding, for those fleeting, fragile moments when the war seemed to fade. And in those silent hours between duty and doubt, Greta began to sense something quietly revolutionary, that even inside captivity, compassion could still be an act of freedom. One afternoon, as she crossed the yard after her shift, a flicker of light caught her eye. Something small and copper glinted in the dust near the fence. half buried beneath a shoe print. She bent to pick it up. A coin. Smooth, warm from the sun, lighter than she expected. Turning it over, she read the faint inscription. 1 cent, United States of America. It was a simple penny, yet it felt impossibly precious. In Germany, coins were now made from iron, stripped of copper long ago for bullets and shells. Copper meant luxury. It meant stability. It meant peace. Greta held it in her palm, marveling at the weight of abundance it represented. Even their smallest coin was crafted from something her homeland could no longer spare. It spoke volumes without a single word. She slipped the penny into her pocket, as though afraid the guards might see. It wasn't theft, just discovery. But somehow, it felt like finding a secret that didn't belong to her. That night, she lay awake, turning it over between her fingers. The metal glowed faintly in the moonlight, a reminder that not everything about the enemy was monstrous. Some things were simply different. Across town, Dorothy sat at her kitchen table, the empty chair beside her still unfilled. For the first time since Jimmy's death, she didn't feel entirely alone. Somewhere his kindness lived on, in translation, and though neither woman could see it yet, that single book had built something extraordinary, a fragile, unspoken peace written quietly between two hearts that should never have met. Winter arrived with quiet persistence, frosting the barracks roofs and whitening the fields around Fort Devens. The prisoners walked carefully through the snow, their breath turning to ghosts in the pale morning light. Life in the camp had found a strange rhythm: letters, work, lessons, silence. Fear had faded into routine, and routine into something almost resembling normalcy. Even laughter, soft and cautious, sometimes slipped through the cold air. Captain Walsh, ever watchful, noticed the change. These women, once trembling shadows of propaganda, were becoming themselves again. It was dangerous and beautiful, like watching flowers bloom behind glass walls. She wanted to nurture it carefully. The idea began as a whisper. A cultural exchange, a small event where the German women could share crafts and traditions with locals. It sounded innocent enough, harmless. But in wartime, nothing harmless stayed that way. Greta was the first to volunteer. She'd begun carving small wooden angels from scraps of lumber borrowed from the maintenance shed. Each one bore delicate wings, as if made to remind her of fragile hope. She worked by lamplight in the barracks, her knife tracing memory more than wood. Her father teaching her the craft in better years, her sister laughing as shavings piled on the floor like snow. When Captain Walsh saw the angels, her eyes softened. "They're beautiful," she said. "You should show them at the event." Greta blushed, unsure how to accept praise from an American. "They are just pieces of home." Dorothy Hayes heard about the plan during her bread delivery. To her surprise, she found herself agreeing to help coordinate. "Maybe it's time the town saw what compassion really looks like," she told Walsh. The preparations filled the camp with quiet excitement. Women embroidered tablecloths, practiced songs, baked small loaves with rationed flour. For a few brief weeks, hope became tangible, a thing you could hold and share. Even the guards seemed lighter, some joking shyly in German phrases they'd picked up. The fences didn't vanish, but their meaning blurred. Inside those lines of wire, humanity was daring to breathe again. On the eve of the event, Greta stood by her bunk, carefully polishing the wings of her final angel. It gleamed softly in the lantern glow, a promise carved into the shape of grace. She thought of her mother, of Dorothy, of Captain Walsh, all women carrying invisible burdens through impossible times. "Maybe," she whispered, "hope is the only rebellion left to us." The penny in her pocket felt warm. But outside the camp, storms of a different kind were brewing. Word of the event had reached the nearby town. Not everyone shared Dorothy's open heart. Whispers of fraternizing with Nazis began to spread. Still, the next morning dawned bright and blue, the air filled with cautious anticipation. Greta arranged her wooden angels on the table, each one shining against the plain linen like tiny keepers of faith. Captain Walsh walked through the hall, checking last details. "No matter what happens," she told the women softly, "remember this moment. The world can't take away the goodness you've built here." Dorothy arrived carrying warm bread. When Greta saw her, she smiled shyly. "For you," Dorothy said, placing a small loaf beside the angels. "It's sweeter than peace, isn't it?" Greta nodded, unable to speak. For one brief, perfect afternoon, war seemed to pause. Laughter echoed in two languages, and strangers became neighbors through art, through taste, through kindness. Behind barbed wire, hope dared to raise its head again. And though none of them knew it yet, the price for that fragile hope would come swiftly. A reminder that peace, even in its gentlest form, is always an act of quiet defiance. The morning after the cultural event, the air inside Fort Devens felt lighter. Laughter still lingered in the corners of the mess hall, and for the first time in months, Greta sensed a fragile joy taking root. But outside the fences, that same joy was being twisted into something ugly. Rumors spread through the nearby town, rumors of betrayal, of softness, of women baking bread for Nazis while American boys died overseas. By noon, the local newspaper ran a small headline, "Fraternization at Fort Devens?" It wasn't an accusation, not yet, but the implication burned like wildfire. Letters poured into town offices, angry and self-righteous. Dorothy Hayes became the first target. A Gold Star mother, people said, should know better. Whispers followed her through the market. Neighbors turned away mid-conversation, their eyes cold, their words dipped in quiet venom. Outside her cafe, someone scrawled, "Traitor's Bread," in chalk on the door. She wiped it away before dawn, pretending it didn't hurt. But the ache settled deep between her ribs and her resolve. Inside the camp, Captain Walsh faced her own storm. Orders arrived from her superiors, stern, bureaucratic, heavy with disappointment. "You've blurred the line, Captain," the letter read. "Kindness must never compromise discipline." She folded it silently. That afternoon, she gathered the German women in the recreation hall. Her voice was steady, though her heart wasn't. "The cultural exchange is canceled," she announced. "Indefinitely." The words fell like stones into still water. Greta stared at her hands, the angels she'd carved now resting in a small wooden box. Around her, whispers rose, anger, confusion, betrayal. Ingrid's voice cut through them all. "I told you, their mercy is a trap." No one answered her. No one had the strength to. The warmth that had filled the camp drained away, replaced by something colder than the winter outside. Disbelief tinged with grief. That evening, Greta walked to the hospital alone. The halls were empty, her footsteps echoing softly. She found Captain Walsh cleaning instruments, her movements mechanical, her expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," the captain said quietly. Greta shook her head. "Not your fault." Walsh hesitated, then added, "Maybe not, but I thought goodness could stand on its own. I forget how fragile it looks beside fear." Her voice cracked like glass. The next day, Dorothy stood before her church congregation, feeling their eyes pierce through her like bayonets. Mrs. Henderson, loud and sharp, demanded, "How can you smile at the people who killed our sons?" Dorothy wanted to scream that compassion wasn't betrayal, that forgiveness didn't erase grief. But her voice failed her. Instead, she walked out, each step a quiet rebellion against the easy comfort of hate. Back at the camp, Greta packed her angels into a box beneath her bunk. She could no longer look at them. Hope had become dangerous, beauty suspicious, kindness treated like a disease. The guard's demeanor shifted, tighter now, colder. Smiles faded, conversations shortened. Even the air seemed heavier, as though invisible walls had grown thicker overnight. The illusion of connection was gone. Ingrid found Greta that night, her eyes burning. "You see, I was right all along. They use kindness to break us." Greta didn't argue. She simply turned away, unwilling to let bitterness finish what war had started. Dorothy's cafe emptied day by day. Customers stopped coming, leaving silence where community used to be. Yet every Thursday, she still baked, leaving one loaf aside, set apart for the camp kitchen, no note, no signature. And somewhere inside that camp, Greta still reached for her penny each night, its copper gleam dulled but enduring. Proof that even when kindness is punished, it still refuses to die quietly, because compassion, once awakened, does not retreat. It learns to hide, to wait, to endure. And in that endurance, it becomes something far stronger than anyone imagined. Winter held Massachusetts in its frozen grip. Snow muffled the sounds of the camp, softening everything except the sharp ache of what had been lost. The air felt thinner, the silence heavier. Greta moved through her days like a ghost, doing her work in the hospital with quiet precision. Her laughter had vanished, replaced by a stillness born not of fear, but of understanding too deep for words. Captain Walsh carried on with military grace, her uniform crisp, her voice calm. Yet each evening, when she passed the empty recreation hall, she paused, remembering the brief miracle of music and peace it once held. Dorothy Hayes, meanwhile, lived inside the echo of her own defiance. Her cafe stood half empty, yet she opened its doors every morning, the smell of fresh bread seeping into streets that now refused to forgive. One night, unable to sleep, Dorothy found Jimmy's old photograph tucked inside a recipe book. His smile was so young, so unguarded, that she felt her chest tighten with a grief that never seemed to fade. She whispered aloud, "I tried to honor you, Jimmy." For the first time, she wondered if her son's sacrifice wasn't meant to feed hate, but to protect the possibility of the gentleness she'd dared to show. At Fort Devens, a Red Cross inspection arrived in late January. The officials noted the camp's efficiency, the prisoners' health, the absence of disorder. They didn't see the invisible wounds, the ones left by disappointment and doubt. When Greta met Dorothy again by chance, it wasn't planned. Dorothy had come to deliver a smaller order of bread. They exchanged a quiet nod, no words, just recognition born of shared endurance. Before Dorothy left, she pressed something into Greta's hand, a folded piece of paper. "For you," she whispered. Back in the barracks, Greta unfolded it to find a single line written in careful English. "Keep believing." She read the words again and again until they became a rhythm in her chest. In that moment, she realized belief didn't have to mean certainty. It could simply mean refusing to let hope starve. Captain Walsh noticed the subtle changes. Greta hummed softly while she worked again. The hospital felt warmer, less mechanical. Walsh said nothing, but inside relief flickered like the first spark of spring beneath the snow. Outside, the war raged on across oceans and continents. None of them knew how it would end, but within the camp fences a different kind of victory was quietly taking shape. One measured not by flags, but by mercy. One cold evening, Greta took out her penny and placed it beside the wooden angels she'd hidden for months. The metal gleamed faintly in the lamplight, reflecting both sorrow and something like faith. She realized then that the penny wasn't just a reminder of America's abundance. It was proof that even the smallest things could carry meaning beyond borders, beyond propaganda, beyond fear itself. When the snow finally began to melt, the camp looked the same, yet everything inside it had changed. Bonds once forbidden had rooted themselves quietly, unseen, like wildflowers growing through cracks in stone. Dorothy visited one last time before the war's end. The guards didn't stop her. She and Greta exchanged a single glance through the fence, both smiling faintly. No words, just the silent language of forgiveness. Years later, long after the fences were gone, Greta would still remember the sound of Captain Walsh's footsteps, Dorothy's smile, the warmth of that penny in her hand. These memories became her own private monument to peace. Because wars don't end with treaties. They end when ordinary hearts choose mercy over fear, when enemies see one another clearly, and discover, against all odds, that humanity was waiting there all along. And in that quiet realization, Greta understood the truest victory of all, not survival, not conquest, but the courage to keep believing in kindness, even after the world forgot how.